And so we're going to get going here. So welcome to everyone who's here and who are continuing to trickle in. Welcome to this Acres USA webinar. This webinar is on living biostimulant technology and its potential benefits. And it's brought to you by N-Soil Algae, a product of the Enlightened Soil Corp, which is dedicated to the elimination of toxic chemicals and empowering farmers in the effective, profitable implementation of a regenerative agricultural system. I'm Paul Meyer. I'm the editor of Acres USA magazine. And today we are talking with three guest panelists. We have Dr. James White, who is a soil microbiologist and researcher at Rutgers University. Dr. George Taylor, who is the founder of N-Soil, and Dan Janski, who's a Minnesota farmer and conservationist. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available within the next couple days on our YouTube channel, Acres USA YouTube channel. You can learn more about us, Acres USA, our magazine, of which I'm the editor, our books, our live events, including our conference coming up 2 to 5 December in Madison, and more. It's at just look up acresusa.com. So the format for today's webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session with the panel. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we encourage you to submit questions in that Q&A block at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then we'll have time for the couple questions at the end here when we wrap up. So with that, I'm going to go to the first question, and then for each of you, you can add in a little bit of your bio if it would be helpful. So let's start off with talking about biostimulants in general. So what is a biostimulant? They've been around as agricultural products since maybe the 70s. And then what specifically is the difference between a living biological product and a non-living microbiological product? So we start with Dr. White.
Yeah, that's a good question. Biostimulants are either organisms, living organisms, or they could be non-living component biostimulants, like, for example, humic substances, right? And either the biological living organism or the non-biological humic substance or other kind of biostimulant, they will trigger physiology in the plant. They will trigger increased growth in the plant. Typically, it's a temporary effect. You know, they get it. They start biostimulants work early on, and then plants get going, and then it peters out, stops. Can't hear you, Paul.
Yep. Great. Yep. Dr. Taylor.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Paul. The biostimulant technology could be ancient. There are reports of it being used, live algae being put on rice in China 2,000 years ago. Since the 1970s, there has been published academic research using them, and the vast majority of the studies that have been published in agronomy journals around the world, mostly around the world, the bulk of them used live algae. They would grow the algae in a tub locally and scrape it off and apply it. So it was harvested and immediately applied. The problem, there was a problem commercializing that, because the live green algae, like other green plants, when put in dark storage, it dies. We've looked at it, and we had a 50% decline in cell counts when we put algae in a closet over a 2 or 3 day period, and it just dies out because it's photosynthesis dependent. And for that reason, the biostimulant market has concentrated on kind of substitutes for live algae, other systems that deliver phytohormones like auxins, cytokinins, gibberellins. That's really what most of the biostimulants do. And as a matter of fact, if you look at most biologicals, that's what they do. They're vehicles for the phytohormones. You apply live bacteria to soil. You know, it's tempting to think that bacteria that can fix nitrogen are actually put on in bulk enough so that they actually do that job. But they've also, the live bacteria have also been shown to produce phytohormones also. So it may be that that's what they're doing. At any rate, think of the biostimulants as Dr. White says, these are a live organism or the compounds themselves that stimulate plant growth. And as we've learned more recently, also stimulate soil microbial activity so that there is an increase in fertility. What we've done that distinguishes us in one way or another is we have been fortunate to stumble across a method for growing algae that allows it to live in dark storage. So now we are able to sell live green algae for use as a biostimulant, much like the researchers were doing back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Putting in soil in a bottle and putting in a closet. We have in soil. In fact, I was told this morning that we have in soil from February of 2023 that's been in storage and looks fine. But with a recommended use by date, which is conservative at 6 months. But it's that's what is different about what we're doing.
Great. And then, Dan, we'll probably get to you more when we talk about the practical aspects of this, but you have anything to add at this point? Maybe just introduce yourself
Yes,
as
I
well.
do. So I just want to say thank you for having me here today, Paul. I am a fourth generation Central Minnesota farmer. I farm with my parents, my brother Tom, my wife Bridget, 2 full-time employees, as well as the helping hands of many friends and family throughout our busy seasons of the year. Our family has 1,000 feedlot animals, 110 dairy cows milked with robotic milking systems, and 30 beef cows. We have 4,000 acres of cropland where we grow alfalfa, canning peas, corn, oats, rye, and soybeans. We also have 30 center pivot irrigation systems, and we utilize about 1,000 acres of strip tillage and cover crops and 3,000 acres of no tillage and cover crops. I am excited to share with all of you today my shift in thinking that has encouraged me to step outside of the norm, and the many wonderful people who have given me the ideas and the thoughts to incorporate these practices. My soil health journey began in 2016 when my brother Tom had suggested giving no-till farming a try. At the time, I was extremely skeptical. Fast forward 8 years, and we are utilizing practices that I never knew existed. With the with the help of YouTube University and Facebook business management courses titled Everything Cover Crops, Johnson Sioux Composting, and Farm Made Bioferts, these pages have encouraged me to utilize compost extracts and biologicals to increase crop fertility, nutrient density, and drought resilience. In September of 2021, after 5 years of learning the importance of minimizing disturbance and keeping living roots on the soil, I realized there's something more. After 10 days in the hospital, my wife Bridget and I brought our newborn son Waylon home to the farm. As first-time parents, our first day home was extremely difficult. We couldn't figure out how to calm down our screaming baby. After a while, I became frustrated and told Bridget I was going to take Waylon for a walk. We ended up in our fully bloomed cover crop field behind our home. After taking 2 steps into that field, the screams and cries of a newborn baby were immediately drowned out by the sound of buzzing bees and chirping birds. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I gotta take a second here. I recall feeling the hair on the back of my neck stand up as the buzzing was so abundant and so close. In that moment, it's almost as if like the when in that moment the crying stopped, and it wasn't until months later that light bulb flipped on that soil is alive. And when Ray Archuleta had asked or questioned a room full of farmers, how do you know you've created the perfect cover crop mix? You can hear it, see it, and feel it. Words that replay in my mind often. And it wasn't until January of 2023 that InSoil was first brought to my attention when Russell Hedrick spoke at the National No-Tillage Conference and highlighted all the ingredients he had utilized to grow North Carolina's state dryland corn yield record of 459.1 bushels to the acre. At the end of Russell's presentation, there was a slide titled New Trials on the Farm. At the top of the list was InSoil. Excuse me. After Russell had left the conference, highlighting gratitude for his willingness to share his recipe for success was Ray Archuleta. I remember him asking how many people in this audience would grow the state dryland corn yield record and share with all of us how you did it. The room fell silent. I am here today because I believe gratitude reciprocates, and you never know how someone or something big or small may impact or influence your life. InSoil 99% water is helping me reach new heights as a farmer. I want to thank Dr. Taylor and Dr. White for sharing your time with all of us today.
Great, thanks, Dan. Really inspiring to hear stories like yours where learning to farm biologically and more in tune with nature is really having a huge impact in the family. And I've had plenty of crying babies too, so maybe I should have done a little bit more cover crop therapy with them.
Yeah, very
Thanks.
cool.
So, Dr. White, going back to the difference between a living biologic product and a non-living one. So can you describe what some of these non-living biologicals are? Phytohormones, broths that are like byproducts, I believe, of these living products. Can you describe that a little bit and how they work and the difference between those and an actual living product?
Yeah, the difference is if it's a product like humic substance, or if it's if it's organisms that have been killed, right? You basically, these are a little different in that you put them on and they're going to last as long as they're there. So you could apply them to soils, apply them to plants, really, because the plants are what responds to those compounds. So put them on the plants or around the roots. And so long as the compound or substance is there, the plant will respond to them. But the difference with a living organism is that, and some living organisms work better than others in the sense that when you put them down, they'll give a kickstart, but they'll last a little bit longer because the plant will actually cultivate them. If, for example, they're bacteria, the plant will cultivate the bacterium around the root tip and take them in, and that will stimulate growth for a period of time. Now, likely they'll be replaced by native microbes when the natives are there. They'll come in and they'll essentially outcompete what you put in. With the algae, the InSoil product, one difference is it's an alga, and really you have, with the InSoil product, you have the algal cell itself, which is, can do photosynthesis, can get sunlight, can produce its own food, so it can withstand, right? It can stay there. But these algae, the algal cells themselves actually have bacteria inside them. They have their own bacteria, so that when the plant gets one of these in-soil algae or absorb some in-soil algae, which are likely growing around the roots, growing, responding to what the plant is feeding them, putting exudates out and so these algae can actually take those substances, these exudates from the plant, and use those for nutrients. But then the microbes the algae and the bacteria are taken into the plant. Okay, so in the in-soil product, because of the way it works, should be a more stable product than many other in terms of the durability in the field and compared to some other biostimulants.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my way of thinking about this analogically is, if you want to get vitamin C, you could take a pill that has been extracted from different things, or you could eat an orange or a carrot or a whole balanced diet that has all these whole food, a whole food that has all these things in them. And analogously to agriculture, you know, commonly we feed plants these synthetic fertilizers that have, it's basically the plant is basically living hydroponically, right? As opposed to the research that you've been highlighting, Dr. White, which is that um, not only do microbes feed the plant, but the microbes, that the bacteria, in this case the algae, are even living inside the plant, that the plant is actually feeding on these bacteria. This is the rhizophage cycle.
It actually is, Paul, that is what I'm actually advocating for biological agriculture and basically regenerative agriculture, right? And tools like the in-soil algal product would enable or will enable growers to begin to build up their soils because they can survive in soils. They can grow in the soils and build up microbial titer and so forth in the soil. So it's an excellent way to start building soil health, right? And eventually, we won't need all the chemistry. Once the soils are healthy and we have good microbes in plants and we're using tools, biological tools like the in-soil product and other biostimulants, we won't have as serious issues with human health and agrochemicals in the environment. But people like Dan have to really pioneer how to do this. And, no one like a lab scientist like me is going to be able to help actually render this down to practice, right? That has to be done by courageous growers like Dan.
You want to add to that, Dr. Taylor?
Yeah, soil, root hairs, microbials, plants, very complex interactive system. On one level, I look at the algae as kind of a phytohormone delivery system that works over time, as opposed to adding a phytohormone that's been purified. I mean, some of the European countries will sell you an auxin product or a cytokinin product that you apply at different times during the growing season. Very sophisticated. But these phytohormone actions are very short-lived when you just apply the compounds. I think of it as a short-acting medicine versus a long-acting sustained release medicine, if you will. Put the algae down, it continues to produce the phytohormones over time. That very well may be simplistic. As James White has shown, there's a heck of a lot going on with the algae interacting with the microbial system, soil microbials, and the root hairs, and becoming endophytic and transporting endophytic bacteria into the plant. I mean, this is all complex stuff, but at base, I just see the algae as a way to, well, I'll put it this way. row croppers are putting it on 3 times a year, and that seems to be adequate. Okay, so they are getting kind of a sustained release effect. One other thing, though, that happened, that the first thing we noticed when we started using it locally ourselves was that it made the plants grow, okay, and made the increased yields and made the vegetables look better. But then we started doing a lot of soil testing, Haney testing, and then genomic testing. The next stage, the next chapter was that we started finding an increase in soil respiration, increase in organic matter, which is, by the way, has been described in previous studies going back to the 1980s or early 80s. And with the genomic studies, a marked increase in both the bacterial and fungal biomass, and an increase in the number of the bacteria that have been shown to fix nitrogen, for example, or solubilize phosphorus. So the effect on soil was pretty striking, but that was kind of the second chapter after we saw what it actually did to plants. And then there are things that have happened since then, but the effect on soil seemed to was a bit of a surprise to us, and actually a nice surprise.
I do want to get to a couple of these questions that are starting to come in, which I think would help kind of focus our conversation as well. One of the attendees is asking for a high-level summary of the different types of biostimulants, just kind of a recap or a summary with pros and cons, and then how green algae would fit into that. Can you take that for just 1 minute, maybe, Dr. Taylor? I know you've written articles about this, for our magazine and other places.
Yeah, I commented on the Acres article that you published in July. I commented that the precise mechanism for biostimulants changing fertility, increasing microbial biomass, has been uncertain, and it's a minority of the available biostimulants that even make the claim that they see an increase in fertility. Some do, many don't. We've seen it pretty uniformly with the live algae, and that has been the experience of previous researchers. I'll be honest with you, I am not expert enough to talk about biostimulants in general. Dan may have a better handle on that than I do.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Dan, or Dr. White?
I'll let Dan go first.
Okay. So I guess you guys were talking about the benefits of human health, animal health, using algae. And obviously when I walk out into the fields and see where I leave my test strips where there is no in soil, and I'm seeing drought resilience, I'm seeing, increase in tonnage on forage, I'm seeing discoloration changes. Now I know a lot of people say color doesn't always have effect in crop health, but somehow, some way, when you see something that's substantially more abundant, bushy, alfalfa, peas, or have been where I've seen the most of this, but the plants seem to hold on to water longer. And somehow I'm no expert in that field, but I do believe the plants are not as droughty. There's got to be more nutrients. It's got to be better for animals. It's got to be better for people. And I think that's what's so powerful about something that you use that's as simple as 8 ounces an acre, and I'm seeing these kind of results. It's very touching.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. And Dr. White, you want to add anything to that? The other question that has come up that I think would be helpful is whether the value of a complex microbial amendment like this is that it brings a single microbe or that it brings the whole consortia. And I think you partially answered that, at least in saying that because there are bacteria that are inside of the green algae, that even though this product we're talking about is one single variety or strain, that it can have a variety of other bacteria that are contributing to the plant. Is that Would that be
It,
your
it,
understanding?
yeah, it actually, the in-soil product carries with it. In the actual, the cans, you actually get the alga itself, right? And you get the endophytic microbes, the microbes that are symbiotic with it. So both of them are in there, at least in all the product that we've examined, we've studied. They're there. And when the plant absorbs them, or that when these are growing around the meristems, and if the plant absorbs them, when the plant absorbs them, presumably they're in a very early stage of development, the bacteria inside them leave the alga and go into the plant.
Mhm.
All that,
That's incredible. That's just crazy.
all
We
that,
don't have any
yeah,
we don't have any photos to blast up here real quick, unfortunately, but I've seen these pictures of and we could probably send these out to the attendee list afterwards of algal cells that are actually inside plant roots,
yeah.
that bacteria that are actually inside the algae, bacteria that are actually inside the plant. It's really incredible.
The
Really, go ahead, George. I'm sorry.
in the growing process is pretty darn green. We're using sterile water, equipment that is sterilized. One of the biggest problems growing algae is having contaminants. You'll come in one day and the tank is brown or black because all the algae is dead. Uh, People who grow algae commercially understand that you've really got to pay attention to sterile technique, if you will, which kind of surprises me that the algae actually have endophytic bacteria. But the other question is, if the algae are living in the dark, it implies that they are consuming other organics. They're basically becoming heterotrophic as opposed to autotrophic. And so, you know, what are they eating? That's been a big question from regulators and U.S. State agricultural regulators. What are they eating? And I think the answer from the experts is that sterility is a relative term. And yeah, there are. I mean, we right now are having we're right now having in soil tested, batch tested when it's being used on leafy greens in California. And what they're really interested in, they don't want to see any salmonella or Shigella on the in the solution in the product. And there's none of that kind of dangerous stuff. But there obviously is some organic material, and that's basically what the algae is apparently living on when it's in dark storage.
A couple other basic questions that I think you could answer real quick, Dr. Taylor. What variety of green algae,
Yeah.
and why do we refer to it as living or dead? And then also the question of how do you keep it alive? And I know some of that is a patented process, but yeah.
Yeah, we're using Chlorella vulgaris. We have PhD phycology consultants who work with us on this, and the man who actually runs the algae production facilities has been growing algae commercially for 30 years. This is not something that amateurs jump into and do very well with, quite honestly. Chlorella vulgaris is these people in the business kind of refer to Chlorella vulgaris as a workhorse algae. It's used for so many different things. I mean, it's used to mitigate oil spill, chew up hydrocarbons. It's used to clean up heavy metals problems. I mean, it's used for a lot of different possibilities. And basically the way we keep it alive, as I said earlier, the growing there is a pre-existing metabolic pathway in the algae that allows it to consume other organics as opposed to just living on photosynthesis like plants do. And the growing process that we have discovered apparently stimulates that metabolic process, allowing the algae to consume other organic material and living in the dark rather than depending on photosynthesis. It's not that there's no genetic engineering involved. We've not created there's none of the techniques of genetic engineering have been used, but basically we feel like we have trained the algae to employ the metabolic pathway that allows heterotrophic growth. That's how it stays alive.
Great.
It works like a
Yeah,
bacteria.
and so you've kind of answered the question as well. So Shannon had asked, I heard algae is a bad thing, a sign of compaction and drainage, but we're talking about a different thing here. Dan, there's a couple questions that I think you could answer together. One, are you saying that you can use in soil with no other inputs if the soil is healthy? And then also, there's a question about the depth at which you're placing it. Are you spraying on the surface versus putting it into the root zone? And then another question as well about whether we can truly get to zero synthetic fertilizer applications. Can you just kind of generally address all of those?
Yep. So I guess we'll start with your first one, which was in regards to if we're using in soil by itself or with something else. We've had these nutritional programs together for several years, whether it's something as simple as boron and sugar going on alfalfa. These were practices we were using already. I just heard about in soil and its benefits. And we started with alfalfa because I had heard alfalfa is where everybody is seeing the largest response. And I did my controls just like I would normally do. I went out in the field and sprayed half of the field with in soil where I was using boron and sugar on my alfalfa, and the other half there was no in soil. And I think later on we'll highlight some of those pictures, but there was definitive differences in between the controls and tests. Where we had used in soil, we had a lot more hay and a lot more nutritional value as well.
Yeah, I can go ahead and pull those up here
Okay.
real quick. I think now would be a good time to just talk through these
And another,
photos.
and maybe I'll add while you're pulling those up too, Paul.
Can you see that there? You see my
Yep.
screen now?
So I've
Okay.
been using
So here's
in
the first
soil
one.
some too as seed inoculants. This particular field pictured was inoculated with in soil. And after it had spiked, I came back again, like I would boron and sugar, to the alfalfa and added in soil. In the center of the picture, you can see there's kind of a definitive lighter green or a droughtier part of the field that you have your cursor on there.
Mhm.
I had put in soil on this entire field. I batched this is a new seeding alfalfa field. And to some people, it might look like a literal cover crop. 25 pounds to the acre of alfalfa, a pound of radishes, 2 pounds of buckwheat, and 15 pounds of oats. I blended these all together in our grinder mixer and dumped the in soil on the top and blended it all together gently, dumped it into my seeder and planted it. And then basically once this field had spiked, it was 3 to 4 inches tall, probably 3 weeks after I planted it, 2 weeks after I planted it. I went over the top with the foliar, boron, sugar, and in soil and sprayed everything except for where my irrigator was parked. In the picture, it's not parked in that spot, but where the irrigator was parked, I drove around the irrigation system. And this was the 120-foot basic check strip in the field. So I was we were actually making forages or chopping corn silage, and I happened to be driving by. And one of those moments where like you kind of like catch yourself jerking your head when you drive by because you're like, there's no way this is real. I am seeing this right before my eyes. Like there's serious drought resilience going on here. This is an irrigated field. It was unintended to let the field get this droughty, but I'm kind of glad it did because it showed me that this field basically had 4 to 5 more days of drought resilience than what I was seeing elsewhere, or what I was seeing in the control, I'm sorry, versus the test.
And so just to clarify, you you are getting the product down into the soil because you're applying it on your seed. So
Yep.
you're essentially using it as a seed inoculant. and then
Yeah.
it's getting down directly into contact with the soil. But then you're also spraying it on top as well.
And I've heard time and time again too, biologicals are so important in the soil. And as the further you go down the line, if you want to use it as seed inoculant, you get the most power. And then following, you get it in furrow. And then after that would be your foliar sprays, where it's not quite as powerful, but it's still making an obvious impact, what we see here. So.
And to just comment too on or answer another question about combining this with other products. You can absolutely safely combine a living biological, a living algae product with other biologicals. They're not gonna interfere with each other. Is that your understanding? That's your understanding, Dan?
What's that?
That would be your understanding that you can mix
Yes.
this with other biological products and other nutrients. And
Definitely from what I've seen, I feel like it synergizes. There wasn't often I was putting boron and sugar on, and I could see clear in the field where there was a definitive difference. So again, I'm not the expert here. I am just someone sharing my experiences, but I do believe that mixing these products together somehow takes these nutrients and makes them much more bioavailable, and they seem to have larger effects on the plants.
Right. And then just sharing these last two photos here, here's your alfalfa without in soil, and then got a couple extra inches of growth there.
This was the real eye opener for me. This spring was the first time that I had actually seen these kind of results. And this was right after alfalfa came out of dormancy. I had mixed up in soil with compost and went out and applied it on the field. So what you're seeing here, this 8 to 9 inch tall alfalfa actually received in soil and compost extract together. So the other side was just compost extract. And I do believe compost extract does offer benefits to our system. It's just synergized by mixing the two together. It just had greater impact.
And Dan, can you talk a little bit about the economics of this compared to synthetics, especially?
I guess I don't like to get too depth into that, just because obviously I didn't come well rehearsed on finances with it today. But I mean,
that's fine.
What I will say is I spent about $9 an acre on the in soil here, and the compost extracts are really, there should be value to compost. I use it as, it's kind of my hobby, what I do in my spare time. I throw these composts together and I make Johnson Sioux compost in aerobic bins, and I extract them in a cone tank with an aeration system, which is filtered. And then I put in our ag sprayer and I mixed the in soil and this together. So, I mean, I had realistically $7 into application from the machine and $9 an acre from the in soil. And this is the results we saw. Now, not alone just the physical attributes, but the tests that we had. I pulled scissor clippings. I don't know if anybody in the audience is familiar with those, but they're basically tests of nutrient value. And in this particular instance, we had about 2.72% higher protein levels, about 1.9% more digestible, and our relative feed value was about 26.5% higher, and our relative feed quality are 31% higher. So we're seeing big differences here. And I think over time, we're going to start to see this even in animals that are raised on feedlot. I do believe that this is going to attribute to healthier animals and, better for all of everything, not just us, but the animals as well.
Great. A couple other questions for Dr. White and for Dr. Taylor. Go ahead. Yeah, Dr. Taylor.
Comment on mixing. It's live algae are being used by conventional farmers as well as people who are regenerative farmers. And it can be mixed with herbicides and pesticides, pretty much anything that that is applied as a liquid application, the algae will tolerate. There are, as of right now, there are 150 farmers using the in-soil algae, ranging from Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas to Montana, Wyoming, California, Texas. It's being used all over the country. And it's being used more by conventional farmers than it is by regenerative farmers. Although it works in both systems. Pretty much every farmer who has tried this starts by saying, "Yeah, sounds good, but I've got to be sure it works on my ground." No one just puts it on everything. My wife's cousin in Central Illinois put it on 20 acres of 10 acres of corn, 10 acres of beans when he started. And that's how people learn about it. And in terms of, you asked the important question, can you get rid of synthetic chemicals? It depends on the region, the kind of soil. It depends on the crop. Potatoes don't need as much fertilizer as corn and beans. And sweet potatoes, do very well with the algae alone. So there are a lot of variables. And the farmers are actually right when they say I have to be sure it works on my ground, because my ground is unique. Everyone's ground is unique. I do think that one thing that people are finding is that people who are transitioning to the regen ag practices find that, yeah, they may need some nitrogen input in that first year or two of using this. But once they start building organic matter and basically restoring fertility, their reliance on synthetic nitrogen and phosphorus goes down considerably. So people are, farmers keep doing trial and error and finding out what they actually need.
I'll answer one question real quick, just so we can get through it. If the algae need to stay alive, how long do we have between shipping, leaving the facility? It is a liquid product. 6 months is what, I think you guys say, but you commented earlier that it could last a lot longer. It is a diluted product, or you dilute the product before you apply it, correct?
Exactly. 1 quart of the algae treats a little over 4 or 4.2 acres. And you just mix it in the volume you need to cover an acre, it's
I think you.
Yeah, at room temperature, a 6-month use by date is pretty conservative. People have stuff left over at the end of the year and want to use it the next year. If it's green, yeah, it's still good. If I were doing that and I had some refrigerator space, I'd probably refrigerate it if I could, if I were going to save it for another year. But no, it is. There's no rush to get it down. But most people who are using it in a big way, like Dan is, order it for not just kind of just in time application. He orders his algae with plans to apply it within a month, not with plans to let it sit for months and months.
Couple questions for Dr. Yeah, go ahead, Dan, just real quick. Yeah.
If I could intervene a little bit, I guess I just want to highlight too, Dr. Taylor's team has been awesome at InSoil. They have given us, when we order our InSoil at the beginning of the season, they highlight how many applications you're going to do, number of crops, the amount of acres you're going to apply. And basically you're set forth with a plan, how much InSoil you're going to need. And in my instance, we ended up with, I think it was right around 15 5-gallon containers of InSoil this year that we had applied on our farm. I just stored them in my basement. They're good. Like Dr. Taylor said, they're good for 6 months. I have basically an old root cellar in the basement of my house that's cool and dark area. And we just keep the containers down there. And anything after I open, I store in a refrigerator just to keep it cool. And aside from that, I mean, if I have any left over at the year, it's a great source of, compost tea. I can add it into my compost bins, and it's something else or another ingredient that gets utilized. It's not wasted at the end of the
Yeah.
year. So
A couple questions I think Dr. White could help answer. This question from Joe Scrimger. How's it going, Joe? With heavy metals or PFAS, how does the algae deal with those to remove them from the soil? And then there's some related questions about if it can either help to clean up Roundup or if it's affected by herbicides.
So I don't think we know the answer to that, but I can tell you in general, some of the toxins can be removed using two, well, by getting a host that's resistant, and we can increase the resistance, the stress hardiness, the tolerance of the plant by putting endophytes in the plant. So endophyte enhanced host, and they can simply grow in soils and absorb the toxins, either by absorbing microbes that are carrying toxins or absorbing it, moving it into the plant, and then that plant material can be removed. The other way that some of those compounds are removed is that because once they're absorbed into the plant, there's an oxidative interaction, reactive oxygen, superoxide. It's really highly potent, and it will denature some kinds of biological, some kinds of molecules. So some sorts of toxins can be denatured using that. So it's really, that moves right into the rhizophagy system, where microbes would carry any of the heavy metals or toxins or whatever they are into the plant where they could be oxidized. Okay, and that would be sort of the strategy there. There's a lot of oxidation that happens on roots as a result of microbes being there, and that oxidation can break down a lot of compounds. Not all, but many compounds will be degraded.
And I think Dr. Taylor answered this question that you can still apply this product with whatever else you have in your tank, that it's not going to be degraded by herbicide itself.
Yeah, including Roundup, it's not a problem.
Right. Couple quick questions for Dan. In terms of seed treatment, does the algal coating serve as an anti-lubricant, neutral in regards to flowability, or as a lubricant enhancer? Did you notice anything along those lines?
Nothing there. I guess I should have stated too. We have an air seeder that I planted everything that I inoculate with. So I take extreme care, caution. Obviously, I don't want to be dumping, 10 gallons of water on top of seed that I'm trying to get through an air seeder system, because it's going to bridge, it's going to create problems. The way I do the system is another great thing about in-soil containers actually is they've got a breather hole on the top. So I can actually unthread that little breather hole and I'll use it as basically my seed inoculator. So I mix whatever I'm going to use with old containers, take that little lid off, dump it over the top of my belt conveyor, and it's just constantly dribbling my seed inoculant in as the seed's going in. Obviously not a foolproof system. I kind of just try to get the seed set so that every 2,000 pounds, I'm putting about 5 gallons of my intended seed inoculant in. And then I dump it into our seed tender, let it sit for a few hours, and then I'll dump it into the seeder so that it doesn't set up and turn to concrete or have big clumps inside the tank. So,
right. And then another question about when you're adding it later, when you're spraying, at what stage did you spray it directly onto that alfalfa?
So normally, obviously, when we normally do like a pesticide application for alfalfa weevils or that sort of thing. And I think about that too as a stress to the plant. Those plants have to metabolize the pesticide you're putting on them or the herbicide you're putting on them. So why not, if we're going out there to cause damage, why wouldn't we go out there to do some good? So I always like to add something in there to feed the plants because they have to absorb what we're giving them. So,
Yeah. Dr. Taylor, have there been any LCA assessments of these microbial amendments?
Not sure. What farmers are generally doing with row crops is that they're doing a soil drench or a seed inoculation. A second application post-emergence with beans maybe at V8, with corn maybe at V5. And then a third application just before the hottest time of the year to add the stress resistance with the heat. So it's basically what most people are doing with row crops is 3 applications at those times.
And will it survive a freeze-thaw cycle? Yeah.
Oh yeah, the algae themselves. The reason for any refrigeration, if you're considering it, isn't the algae. The algae's fine in the heat. It's to keep bacteria from growing in the algae. Just like you do with milk, you keep it refrigerated so that you don't have bacterial overgrowth. That would be the only reason for keeping it in a cool environment. But the algae itself tolerates heat and cold quite well, and it can freeze and still be viable. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, one other question is because the algae seem to be chowing down on other organic material as bacteria that's in the jug with the algae. We wonder if the algae aren't even more resistant to contamination since they are devouring bacteria. They may be just more resistant. And
That's what we would expect, George. We would expect that.
uh,
That's the expectation. Yeah, because it's a interactive interaction, right? Where in this case the alga is interacting with the bacterium, the bacterial endophyte that it takes in with reactive oxygen, right? So that makes the alga upregulate its own enzymes and stress features, right? So the antioxidants, for example, that's going to protect it from stress and so forth, gets upregulated. So that's with the bacteria. So it may be enhancing and that's what I would look for. I would try to do an experiment where you can control the amount of bacteria and then see if you get increased hardiness with you in those ones where you have more bacteria.
it's kind of interesting that when you look at the literature on salt and drought tolerance with algae, the studies are there's some elegant studies that have been done with looking at this, and what they've actually shown is the plant's level of antioxidants like superoxide dismutase is higher after they've been treated with algae. So you kind of get a mechanism, so if you will, for how the algae does protect peroxidases, superoxide dismutase. A number of these compounds have been shown to be higher in the plant, making them more resistant to drought and salt. Maybe you did a study though. You did the study where you did a direct comparison of the in-soil algae that had been grown to be heterotrophic with other algae we sent you that did not go through that process, that were just plain chlorella, and you did show a difference between the in-soil and just the plain chlorella.
Yeah, no, we did that comparison in the lab to look at the two different sources. But what we never did, we never went to the point where we actually measured enhanced oxidative stress tolerance. I mean, that would be the next experiment, right? And we didn't have the time. We didn't put the time in for that level, that test. But yeah, absolutely right. We did some comparisons, and we would expect that you have more stress hardiness and heavy metal tolerance, and all that stuff relates to heat tolerance. It all relates to oxidative stress tolerance, and that comes directly from having interaction with those microbes.
So being heterotrophic may help. It's interesting. I've shown those results to academic agronomists, and they'll look at field trials and kind of say, where are your 6 replicates, when you're doing the field trial. But when they saw those studies that you did that were couldn't be confounded by weather, soil type, or anything else. I mean, it was just the auger plates with nothing else on it, they were all extremely interested in that, because that basically strips it down. Whereas, what farmers have to do is they have, I would tell a farmer to trust that it works, but again, you've got to see how it works in your setting on your ground.
There's so many people, I think, that are skeptical about this idea, and I think a lot of people, it's very hard to incorporate or try something like this, because how many different things can you buy in agriculture that are supposed to be better for the soil, or give you a yield bump? And I think a lot of people are just tired of hearing it. But the reality of it is, at least on our farm, we're seeing the same things Dr. Taylor's highlighting. Is, yeah, it can be seen on yield trials, not just physical attributes, but I'm seeing anywhere from 9 to 27 bushels an acre on corn from this growing season. Now that could be, we had one field where we did corn silage, like Dr. Taylor had highlighted, the 3 applications. And I think, and the reason I didn't do a test on this farm is because it was all going to livestock feed. And I had Tucker sent me an article that had highlighted the benefits to livestock that were fed crops that had algae on them. So we had a little left over from that farm, and same thing, we did our micronutrients that we added with the in-soil. I took a plot below our house down here that's actually corn this year, and there was enough left over to spray about 3 acres. That 3 acres was 27 bushels above the rest of the field average, sprayed on once. I think the timing was perfect. It was like V6-ish time. I can't say for sure. I knew that was the right time. It just worked out that way. But that same field as well did a control test where we actually fertigated 28% nitrogen and added in soil with it, where we put boron inside those tanks and we mixed it. It was used and applied onto the field. It's actually worked out perfectly because we had two 250-gallon tanks. So I had the one tank spun on half of the field with our normal 28% in boron that we put on at fertigation timing. The next morning I woke up when the irrigation system was halfway around. I actually was there in the perfect time, closed the valve and switched over to where we had the in-soil, and same thing there. There was a yield advantage to doing so. In that spot was 9 to 12 bushels an acre, which is very crazy to me because we had our smaller fertigation pump on there, so we couldn't run the irrigation system around with a minimal amount of water. It was still put on with a half to 3/4 of an inch of water and 8 ounces. And, you'd look at your 27,000 gallons of water on an acre. That's kind of crazy that it was in that large volume of water, 12,000 gallons an acre, and we still saw yield advantage to using it.
So the question is, how can that work? And I think the answer is that the math has been done using it as recommended. The dose is basically 50,000 algae cells per square foot of soil. If you do the arithmetic from the cell counts and the amount put on per acre. That sounds like a lot, but it really isn't when you compare it to the gazillion bacteria and fungal cells that are in the soil in that same space. But apparently what the algae, 50,000 cells apparently broadcast enough phytohormone that does do the job over with that application rate. I mentioned that 150 farmers are using this. And we our website has a lot of information, the information from the farmers themselves, crop report basically. We have had going from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, I think we're over 95% in terms of people continuing to use it. We've not had it's extraordinarily rare that we've had somebody who used it and then said, didn't do much for me. I'm going back to my NPK. That just hadn't happened.
I'm going to be honest with you. Last year we had some corn trials and we had a terrible mix up with our test. The combine had issues recording the test. And I was like, oh man, I'm not going to know if I got that benefit or not. And this spring, when I saw the alfalfa, it wasn't even a question that we, without a doubt, had a benefit, especially now this year, seeing it on corn and seeing the advantages having it there. So I really doubt that anybody could use in soil and not see a result.
Yeah. It's been true
Well,
for pretty much all crop types. I mean, it's been used on hemp. There's a big group in Guatemala that's used it on sugarcane. Been used on sugar beets. It's been used, a big pepper trial in North Carolina, a citrus trial in South Georgia, and recently pecan tree studies in Texas. I mean, it's been used on a great variety of different kinds of plants, and it's been pretty effective across the board.
well, this has been a great discussion, and unfortunately, we've hit the end of our time. So I have recorded all of these questions, and if you're a listener and you're still here and you have another question or your question hasn't been answered, we're going to get all these questions to some of our panel, and we'll do our best to get back to you with the answers. If you even want to stick on around for another minute or two and type in another question, that would be fine. So just to conclude here, thanks again to our panel. You guys have been great information. You can learn more about it in soil at enlightenedsoil.com. You can learn more about Acres USA, our magazine, our books, and our upcoming conference in December 2 to 5 in Madison, Wisconsin at acresusa.com. And I know InSoil will be there and lots of other great speakers and companies. And thank you again for being with us. And we look forward to having you again. Dr. Taylor, one last word.
The website has been changed. It is now insoilalgae.com.
Okay. Insoilalgae.com. Although I just did type in enlightedsoil.com and it still worked, at least for now.
It's the old site, and it's the new site is nazier. So
got it. Great. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, Dr. White. You guys have shed some light on things that I still had questions about. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Dan.
thank you, Dan. Great work.